Alright, so students, for this video, we are going to discuss how to solve the equation in quadratic form. Right, so learning outcome 1.3, what is it? So they actually want you to recognize and solve equation in X which are quadratic in some function. Alright, so as an example, if you're having this equation, actually this equation, you can use quadratic method to solve it. Alright, so we call all this as quadratic form equation. Yeah, right, so if let's say when you look at one equation and then you realize that you can put it into this pattern, a bracket square plus b bracket plus c. Okay, and then in the bracket it must be something similar, right? Something the same, exactly the same thing, right? In the bracket. So when you have this kind of pattern, we call them as quadratic form equation. Alright, so all this pattern you can solve it by using quadratic method such as factorization, or maybe using the quadratic formula if you want. Okay. Right, so to solve all this kind of question, so first you need to write in standard form of quadratic and then substitute a variable for the brackets that we have. Okay, then you solve the quadratic equation and then you find the answer for the original variable. Okay, so the steps looks like very complicated, so I will just show you an easier method now. Alright, okay, so let's have a look for example 9. Okay, so for example 9, if you look at this kind of question for A-level, right, when you look for this, for x equals to 0, x greater equals to 3, x smaller than whatsoever, no need to bother about it first. These are our domain, the domain of the function, and we are going to learn all this domain for the function in the second chapter, which is something new to all of you. I believe that you learn domain before you understand the word of domain, but actually for A-level, they would like to ask you to find the domain itself. Not only understand, but you have to find out the domain, the correct value for the domain, right? So we will learn all this in chapter 2. Okay, so let's have a look for the g. So our gx is actually what? Gx is equals to x minus 3 square root x. And they want you to solve this equation, gx equals to 10. Okay, so I want to solve gx equals to 10, which means x minus 3 square root x minus 10 is equals to 0. Okay, so when you look at this one, how are you going to solve the quadratic, solve this question? That means how are you going to find the value for x? Okay, so there are a few. The most commonly seen one is this one. Student will group the 3 square root x one side, and then they'll have x minus 10 on the other side. And then what they did, now what they are going to do is they will square both sides usually. Okay, so when you square both sides, 3 squared is a 9. Square root x squared, you get x equals to x squared minus 20x plus 100. Okay, so if you continue further, then you should have x squared minus, so x squared minus 29x plus 100 and is equals to 0. Okay, then after that, from here, maybe some students will say that, okay, you try to solve the quadratic equation. Okay, but can you solve it or not? Should be no problem, right? Okay, so what is the method that you can use? Do you want to use factorization, or do you want to use the formula? If you use calculator to try and get the answer right, you actually can get the factorized formula. So you can get actually x minus 25, x minus 4, and it is equal to 0. Okay, and then you have x minus 25 equals to 0, x minus 4 equals to 0, and then x equals to 25, x equals to 4. Okay, so this is the answer. Alright, but when you want to apply this method, you need to be very, very careful because of, first, it will be more suitable if, let's say, you are having something with square root x, And then when you square it, it will become x1. So when you want to take square both sides, you have to make sure that there's one side, they have only a term with square root x. You cannot square both sides with square root x plus 10, 3 square root x plus 10 squared equals to x squared. Okay, logically, when you look at it, it is not wrong, but if you expand everything, you still have the square root x here, and you cannot solve it. All right, so there are some small techniques or some small details that you need to know when you want to apply any method. Okay, so if you want to apply this method, square both sides one, then this is how you do it. You have to make sure that the square root x is only the term that stand alone there when you want to take the square, so that you can make the square root of x disappear when you square it. Okay, if you put it like this, after you expand this part, you still have square root x in the equation. It's impossible for you to solve it then. Okay, all right. So this is one of the method. Okay, all right. So is there any other method? Okay, so here I want to introduce another method, which is you write it in a quadratic form. Okay, so this is method number 2. I don't know which one you understand better lah. Okay, to me, right, square both sides is not the best way, the best method. You can solve it here because of our x power is not complicated. Can you imagine or not, if let's say in a particular question they ask you x power 6, so how can you solve it when you square both sides? Okay, it becomes very complicated. All right, so this is the method that I would still suggest you, if let's say you can avoid, try to avoid. Unless you are very sure that, okay, you only have square root x and x, then you can square both sides also. Yeah, so for me, I usually prefer method number 2. Okay, so what is method number 2 here? Generally, it's like this. So you also write the steps. You're having x minus 3 square root x when equals to 0. So you see that, okay, the x and the square root x, their relationship is when you square the square root x, you will get an x. When you square something here, you will get something here. Okay? Therefore, if you realize that this is what you have in your equation, then you try to let y equals to the term with the smaller power. Let y equals to square root x. If you let y equals to square root x, what will happen to this equation here? X will become y squared. Why? Because when you square the square root x, you get x, and therefore this one will become y squared minus 3y minus 10 equals to 0. And from here, you will realize that you can factorize it, which is y minus 5, y plus 2 equals to 0. Therefore, you are having y equals to 5 and also y equals to negative 2. Okay? Alright, so now, is this the final answer? This is not the final answer, okay? And what should you do? Your answer should be in terms of x. It's x, not y. They want the value of x, but they don't want the value of y. Therefore, you need to do extra steps here. Y is square root x, so square root x equals to 5. Square root x equals to negative 2. Okay, therefore your x is equals to 25 when you square it. Okay, so now for the answer here, your square root x, in front here they didn't write any sign, right? If they didn't write any sign, means that it is a positive. Okay, so positive square root x equals to 2. This is impossible to happen. Because no matter how you take the square root x, you won't get any negative value. Okay, because they already tell you that in front, they didn't write any sign, means it should be a positive. Okay, but I want to get a negative answer. This is impossible, therefore I should ignore it. Okay, so if I'm using method number 2, this is the only answer that I have. Okay, then now the problem comes, right? Some students will say, oh, okay, so the answers are different because method number 1, I have 2 answers. But method number 2, I can see that I have only 1 answer here. Because again, some of you didn't realize it, that this must be a plus. in front of the square root x. This one is negative, so it is impossible for you to get a negative value here. Unless original equation is something like this. So maybe you're having x squared equals to 2. Then when you take the square root yourself, for square root 2, only you put the plus and minus sign. But for this example, they already give the square root x at the beginning of the question, right? So you are not taking the square root yourself. Okay, right? And therefore, you no need to include the plus and minus sign. Okay, all right. So this is, so I know that it is a bit hard for you to understand, but this is actually a small concept that you need to know. Okay? If you don't believe, you can actually try to put in the 4. Because if you continue, you get the x equals to 4. You try to put the 4 into the equation and see what will happen. So you have 4 minus 3 times 2. Square root 4 is 2, right? Then minus 10. What do you get? So 4 minus 6 minus 10. So 4 minus 6 minus 10, you will get a negative 12. Is it equals to 0? It is not equals to 0. So from here you can see that 4 is actually not the correct answer. Okay, therefore, if let's say I'm using method number 2, okay, so I'll straight away ignore here because I know that it is impossible for me to get the answer. If let's say you are not so sure, then you can write x equals to 4. If you write x equals to 4, generally you write out both answers, right? Then your answer is wrong because there's only one answer actually. Okay, x equals to 4 cannot be accepted because if you put in the 4 into the equation, the correct equation. Right? So for me, method number 2 is easier way because it can help me to eliminate the unwanted answer. From here, I already know that I want to ignore the x equals to 4. Okay, then how about if let's say you're using method number 1? Then you actually don't know because if you look at the steps here, it looks very logical. Right or not? But again, this is not the correct answer. So some student will ask me, then how in the exam? So if let's say you want to use this method, right, you have to be clever enough to check all your answer every time and substitute it into the equation and try to see whether it is correct or not. Alright, so I understand that it is a bit hard for you because even for me myself, usually I also won't substitute the value back into the equation and check the answer. Okay, but no choice. This is the method. If you want to use method number 1, then you really have to check. If you forget to check, then okay lah, just lost 1 mark, donate 1 mark for them. Okay, but actually you need to check your answer and see whether should you accept both or not. Okay, but method number 2 to me, it actually is more straightforward because it can show me that this is a wrong answer. Alright, so there's no specific method, the best method that we have. It depends on how you look at it. So both method number 1 and number 2 actually will be accepted in the exam. Alright, so we'll see which one you prefer more. Okay, so usually for me, I will use method number 2. I will put it in the quadratic form equation, which is I will let y equals to something in my equation, and then I will change it become a quadratic equation, then I solve. Okay, so this is what we have for the quadratic form. Let's continue to the other part. Okay, so example 10. Alright, so again, for example 10, they want to find the real roots. Okay, so they want to find the value of x. Alright, so how can I find the value of x? So when you're having all the x power 4, x power 2 in the fraction form, okay, in the denominator, you can't actually solve it. So you have to bring all this up, alright, or cancel it, or try to adjust, alright, so that there's no denominator. There's no x squared, x power 4 in the denominator. Alright, so to make this whole thing disappear, for the whole equation, you need to multiply with, you have to multiply the whole thing with x power 4. Okay, that means the left-hand side, you multiply it with x power 4. Right-hand side, you also multiply it with x power 4, so that the equation is still balanced. Okay or not? Alright, so you can start now. I will try to eliminate the x power 4 and x power 2 in the denominator. So to do that, I will multiply x power 4 both sides. Okay, so when I multiply them, the left hand side I'm having 18 plus x squared equals to 4x power 4. Okay, so usually I will put the highest power for the variable, the x, as the first term, followed by the second higher power, and then minus 18, and it is equals to 0. Okay, so again, I don't know whether you can see it clearly or not, but generally you see that I'm having x squared, and then the double of x squared is x power 4. Okay, so from here, I actually suspect that this is a quadratic form equation. So I will try to let the y equals to x squared. I let it equal to the smaller power 1. Okay, then continue from here, you have 4y squared minus 9 minus 18 equals to 0. Okay, and then from here, you try and see whether you can factorize it or not. Okay, so for me, I know that I can factorize it. Okay, and after that, I will have y equals to 9 over 4, y equals to negative 2. So x squared is equals to 9 over 4. X squared is equals to negative 2. So if you continue further to get the x, it will be plus minus 3 over 2. And then this part, you will get the math error. Therefore, we ignore it. Alright, so for this example, because you want to take the square root on your own, therefore you need to include the plus and minus sign. Okay, so this is how we do it. Alright, so for this example, the method that we are using is a quadratic form equation. And you see that I change it because of the equation, and then after that I solve it. Okay, so some student will ask me, for this question, can I square both sides or not? Okay, so I can tell you that it's quite impossible because if you square both sides, right, your power becomes something with power 8, which is impossible for you to solve it. Alright, but if you're having the quadratic form equation, you're still having a quadratic equation here, then it's easier for you to solve it. Okay? Alright, so this is what we have for the quadratic form equation. Both example 9 and also example 10. Alright, so not many questions come out from this part, but generally it has been asked before in the past year question also, in the past year series. So this is also one of the questions. You can see, right? Answer question. Okay? Alright. So hopefully you have the idea what we are doing here. So this is what we want to cover for this video. And next one, we are going to discuss the inequality. Okay, inequality means all the greater, smaller sign, okay, for both quadratic and also linear equation. Right. Thank you very much.